This one being when you talk about the overall design, and then the next one is when you talk about the
Good evening. Welcome to the meeting of the Skokie Village Board for Monday, September the 19th, 2022. This evening, we will be led in the Pledge of Allegiance by Village Clerk Pramod Shah.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The meeting will come to order, and before we proceed with the roll call, I would like a motion to permit the participation by remote by Trustee Kim Kuhn this evening. Trustee Johnson, seconded by Trustee Klein. Call the roll, please.
Trustee Sutker?
Aye.
Trustee Robinson will join with us a little later. Trustee Kuhn?
Aye.
She's muted.
She said aye.
Oh, aye.
Trustee Johnson?
Aye.
Trustee Pure Slovin is absent today. Trustee Klein?
Aye.
Mayor Van Dusen?
Aye, the motion passes. With that, we did have a roll call, and the motion passes. Next item is approval of the consent agenda for this evening's meeting. A motion is in order. Trustee Sutker, seconded by Trustee Klein. Is there anything on the consent agenda anybody would like to have removed? If not, call the roll, please.
Trustee Sutker?
Aye.
Trustee Kuhn?
Aye.
Trustee Johnson?
Aye.
Trustee Klein?
Aye.
Mayor Van Dusen?
Aye, the motion passes. I would like to welcome, with passage of the consent agenda this evening, Ferdinand Soko, who will be the newest member of the Board and Fire Police Commission, Helene Levine. Helene Levine will become the new vice chair. Michelle Beatrice is joining the Fine Arts Commission. We would like to wish Dr. Werner, who has served as chair of the Board of Health, all of our best wishes. We hope he does well in his recovery. He is in our thoughts, and we thank him for his service to the village. This evening, I would like to point out one person who is retiring. I think if anybody walked down the street and asked, what does the Board of Fire and Police Commission do? Most people probably would say, what is it? And that's because the board itself is not flashy, doesn't seek public attention, but it does essential work for the village of Skokie. It's the commission that does the hiring of new members of our police department and our fire department. They do promotions. And it's work that is time-consuming. It takes hours upon hours upon hours to review the tests that our recruits take, to do the interviews of the many applicants we have, and then to re-interview those who have gotten to that stage. For 35 years, Burl Rabinowitz has served on the Board of Fire and Police Commission. And for a significant part of that time, Burl has been the vice chair. He hasn't sought attention. He's just simply gone about doing a great job for the village of Skokie. And this evening, I would like to recognize Burl for all of the hard work and the many hours that he put in. A slight tidbit. Burl and his wife Ada, who are longtime residents of the village, spend time in Florida during the winter. Burl flies back for each board meeting so he doesn't miss one. That's dedication. And so, Burl, we'll miss you. We thank you very much for everything that you have done. And I would like to present you with a certificate of appreciation from the board as a token of our appreciation for your longtime service. And we have a great police department, a truly great fire department. It's not an exaggeration to say that they are among the finest in the country. And it's because Burl and all of the members of the commission, and if the commission would, because I see them sitting in the back, would you just stand so everybody can welcome you? Will Evans serves as our chair. Helene Levine is our new vice chair. Nicole Potash and Bruce Rotner all serve on the commission. So when you see them on the street, just give them a pat on the back and thank them for the time they put in. So, Burl, I would like to present this to you and thank you. And Trustee Sucker has some words that she would like to make. Okay, let
Well, I'd like to say a few words before you start your speech.
Okay.
I'd like to thank Burl Rabinowitz for his 35 years of service to the community. He brought experience, knowledge, and dedication to his position as commissioner. His only motivation was to better public safety in the village of Skokie. We have been so lucky to have him all these years. Congratulations, Burl, on your retirement from this role, and I'm sure I'll see you on the basketball court.
Thank you, Edie. Appreciate that. In 1987, I received a letter from Mayor Al Smith, and here it is, informing me that I was selected to fill Seymour Lafer's position on the Fire and Police Commission. Needless to say, I was honored. Over my 35 years, I've reviewed thousands of background and psych files, interviewed hundreds of applicants to search out the best candidates for the fire and police departments. I believe the commission has done our part in helping both departments achieve the Class 1 certifications. I'm very proud of the work we have accomplished. On my bio in 1987, I was asked why I wanted to serve on the commission. And I said that after living in the village for 24 years, now 58, and taking advantage of what the village offers, I would like to give something back, which I think I have done. I want to thank all the village officials that I have served under and the staff that I've worked with. I appreciate the confidence they had in me. To my fellow commissioners, it has been truly a pleasure serving with you, and all I can say is keep up the good work. To my wife and family, I appreciate the support you have given me for all the years. Thank you all.
And I believe I may have seen a colleague of ours here, Mayor Patel of Lincolnwood. Are you welcome? The next item on our agenda is report of our village manager, John Lockerbie. Bless you.
Thank you, Mayor Van Duzen and Village Board. Good evening, everyone. Item A this evening is regarding an information session regarding potential ownership, structural change at Maple Tower at Optima, located at 9739 Woods Drive. Some residents from this tower have communicated with the village their concerns regarding the potential for deconversion or converting the condominiums to apartments by Trilogy Real Estate Group. There are also residents interested in the deconversion. The village acknowledges the potential stress of this situation for condominium owners of this building and is interested in supporting these residents. In order to be responsive to the residents and to understand what is occurring, as well as the potential process moving forward, representatives from both the seller and the buyer have been invited to present information to the village board this evening. Jesse Kursik, the Chief Investment Officer of Trilogy Real Estate Group, will make a presentation first this evening, and then Kelly Elmore, the principal at the law firm of Kovitz, Schifrin, and Nesbitt, is an authority on the deconversion process and is retained by the Maple Tower Association and will also present information this evening. And so with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Kursik.
Hello and good evening. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. I am Jesse Karasik, close on the pronunciation. And I am the Chief Investment Officer of Trilogy Real Estate Group, and thank you for having me today, Mr. Mayor and trustees. Many of you know the history of the Optima Towers, but for those who don't, here's a very brief summary. There are 3 towers in the overall Optima development. The Maple Tower is the furthest to the north, and it was the last tower to be built. It was delivered at exactly the wrong time. Toward the end of 2007, the Great Recession hit, and only 106 of a total of 277 units within the tower were sold. In order to avoid foreclosure, the original developer, Optima, leased up the remaining 171 units and operated them as rentals. Those units have been operated as rentals ever since, and Optima sold those units to a Trilogy affiliate in 2016. Our intentions at the time when we purchased the property was to operate them as rentals and then at some point down the road sell them off as condominiums. Unfortunately, the world changed, the market changed, and condo values never returned as robustly as apartment values. In fact, condominium values within the Maple Tower have continued to decline. Despite our efforts on 2 separate occasions, trying to seek beneficial FHA approval for the entirety of the tower, so owners could obtain federally insured mortgages, the building was never approved by the FHA, and it was never approved for those insured loans, which means that any buyer in the Maple Tower cannot get FHA insured mortgages, which means that higher leverage loans for new buyers is impossible. As we sit today, a Trilogy affiliate owns 175 units as we currently stand today. 102 units are owned by individuals. Of the 102 units owned by individuals, 34 units are owned by other investors. Those units are also rented. As such, 209 of the 277 units as we sit today are already occupied by renters. In percentage terms, that equates to 75.5% of the building occupied by renters. Given this situation, and if and when we were to sell or would sell our inventory of units, we believe that the most likely buyer, the highest bidder, would be another condominium deconverter, as they call it. We have never deconverted a building before. Whether it wasn't our intention to do so, but whether we perform the deconversion or someone else does, we do believe that a deconversion is ultimately inevitable at this property. Illinois law provides for this process. Cook County law provides for this structure. And all 102 unit owners signed bylaws agreeing to the way that the homeowners association would be run and operated. And they agreed to the 75% supermajority threshold for a deconversion. At this point, I would categorize 3 basic groups of owners within the 102 units. Some of them are happy sellers, and we're talking to them on a daily basis. There's another group of people who are very interested in selling so long as they get a high enough price. There's another group who are very frustrated, a group of individuals who just don't want to sell. For the happy sellers who we're talking to daily, they don't want others to know who they are. They don't want to be confronted by dissenting owners, and as such, I don't expect them to be here tonight. I hope some of them are, but they may not be. I do have empathy for those who don't want to sell, no matter the price. I understand, I get it. Because the Maple Tower is their home. Those people who love living at Optima will be offered leaseback opportunities. But the fact is that the Trilogy affiliated investment in the building is approximately 50 times larger than the next largest owner as we currently stand. We've been waiting for over 6 years, and if a recession looms and values continue to decline further, simply waiting could be potentially an economically advantageous move for the buyer. Instead, the buyer is willing to pay an above market price now. Relative to individual condo values, there will be no realtor fees for the sellers. The association's reserve dollars, currently approximately $1 million, will be allocated back to the owners. And either relocation costs or 1 to 2 months free will be offered for everyone. In conclusion, and to recap, we understand and have empathy for those who don't want to sell, which is why we've not been utilizing a number of the tactics that other deconverters do use. However, the facts are as follows. The property has been operated primarily as rentals for the last decade. If we don't convert, at least at this point, we believe someone else will. No one will have to move. Our preference is that people take us up on the leaseback opportunities. Every owner in the building agreed to the bylaws before they bought into the building, which outlined the 75% supermajority. And lastly, the majority of the unit owners will receive more than they otherwise would have today for the unit. Thank you again for your time. I'm happy to answer questions. I, again, do have a lot of empathy for the folks who don't want to sell because I do understand, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Why don't I ask if Kelly Elmore has any comment, and then I'll open it for the board, and then I'll call on, I assume, Rabbi, you wanted to speak? Okay. So, Ms. Elmore, did you have comments you were prepared to make?
I do, thank you. So, as previously stated, I am a principal at Kovitz, Schifrin, Nesbitt, and our firm represents over 5,000 community associations, so condominium associations, townhome associations, and homeowner associations throughout the Chicagoland area. Back in 2015, when we first started seeing these deconversion offers being made to our clients, I was one of the first attorneys to deal with a deconversion sale. Since that time, because of the market and what's been occurring, our firm, through me, created a deconversion department, which I chair, and we've closed over 81 deconversion sales. So this is a fairly common occurrence throughout Illinois, and especially in the Chicagoland area. And we've seen, I think, probably anything and everything on these deals to date. One thing I always like to note is we do not represent buyers. We have never represented buyers. We only represent associations and the unit owners in the associations. We've never worked with or for Trilogy. We have no affiliation with this particular buyer. And so my comments tonight are general comments regarding these associations and what we have seen on the 80 deconversion sales we have closed and the 50 or so other ones we have worked on. As an initial note, in order for a deconversion sale to occur, 75% of the ownership must agree in the state of Illinois. Obviously, there is a different percentage in the city of Chicago, but you do need a supermajority of the ownership to agree in order for a sale to move forward. Generally, we don't see these deals move forward unless you receive that supermajority. And for a buyer to be able to get that majority, they have to offer something above and beyond, above fair market value prices, some other types of incentives. I have not seen any specific offer to date from Trilogy, but I believe what Mr. Karasik just mentioned was certain incentives, such as the association receiving the reserve funds back that will go back to the owners, which does not happen on a traditional real estate transaction, potentially relocation costs for owners who do wish to move, favorable lease terms for those owners who wish to stay. On the deals that we have worked on, that is typically what is needed for owners to decide as an individual decision to move forward with a deal. We represent, as association counsel, all of the owners in the association. We represent the individual who never ever wants to sell no matter what the price. We represent the owner who is desperate to sell because they have an underwater mortgage and haven't been able to sell or refinance. And I think often in these discussions, it's really important to note that there are owners in some associations who are dealing with underwater mortgage situations. They're not able to refinance or to sell their units. And what we have been seeing more of in the last couple of years, especially after what happened in Surfside, Florida, is owners faced with pending and impending capital expenditure costs and rising assessment costs that owners, especially who are on fixed incomes, aren't going to be able to meet. So for some owners, not all, but for some owners, the deconversion sales have been a lifeline for owners to be able to sell. So that gets us to specifically with an association where there has been a request by some to ask a municipality to consider either a moratorium or to increase a voting percentage. What we do highlight is there is a mechanism in the association's governing documents for this ownership, if they opt to decide to increase the voting threshold from 75% to a higher number. Some associations in in Illinois have done that. There's also another mechanism to amend your governing documents to prevent a particular entity from owning more than a certain percentage of units. So there is a path in the governing documents for those things to be done. Secondly, if the association does not do that, there are other mechanisms for the protection of the owners built in under the Act. Specifically, there is an objection process. So if an owner feels, if they've upgraded their unit or spent a particular amount, that they're not receiving above fair market value for their unit, there is an objection process set forth in the Act that they can take advantage of. All of the contracts that we draft clearly set forth a path to do that so that all owners are protected if they feel that they're not receiving the correct value for the property. And lastly, on this particular deal, much I think has been mentioned about making sure that the process is done transparently and without any conflict of interest. I can assure this board that we have worked with the current board members, and there is a disinterested board member who has been appointed as the liaison to work with our office to ensure that there is transparency throughout this process. Certainly KSN within the community, representing thousands of associations, we have a reputation and always conduct ourselves in good faith on these types of sales, and will ensure that the association at all times proceeds in accordance with the law and in accordance with their governing documents. At the end of the day, this is a real estate transaction for the owners of the individual association to decide. Thank you.
Okay. At this point, does Do any of the members of the board have any questions? Let me start. Trustee Robinson, do you have any questions?
I do. Mr. Kurasik and Ms. Elmore, thank you so much for the presentation. Mr. Kurasik, you mentioned that there were other tactics that other companies use, when through the deconversion process. What would those
A
tactics?
common example is to do things like increase association dues beyond a level of affordability. And that's something that we've seen a number of times. It's just not something that we would ever do.
Ms. Elmore, have you seen or heard about other tactics that were used?
I have. I think similarly, I have seen or heard of buyers on deals that, not on ones that we have worked on, where there were threats of or deliberate attempts to increase the assessments or impose a special assessment if a boat was not approved. I think that's probably the primary one that we have seen.
Trustee Sutker?
Did I hear you correctly that you said that 75.5% of the building right now are renters?
They're renters, but we don't own 75.6.
You own 60%, correct?
Right, we own approximately 62%,
Okay.
That's correct.
And it sounds like there's no way to let people who want to stay in their condos stay in their condos and still own it as a condo.
They wouldn't be able to still own it as a condo.
They
would be able
could
to
lease
rent.
back. Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. So they would lease it back. We would give them a free rent period, and then they would lease it back on an annual basis, as much as potentially 2 years. Unfortunately, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, who provide the vast majority of the apartment financing for these total buildings, won't finance projects with longer than 2-year terms. So we would not be able to provide longer than 2-year terms. However, 1 to 2 year terms is the term that we would provide, and they would live there just like everybody else within our renter pool lives. It's the demand for those units is extremely high. This morning, we were 98.8% occupied. So there's a very high demand for, yes, please.
There's some people having trouble hearing you. If you can just speak, if
sorry.
everybody can just speak into your microphones a little bit more. Thank you very much.
Sorry about that. So to answer your question, they would have to rent from us.
How does the process work in terms of a timeline? Like, if you can give me more of the
Right.
time.
I think, so the next step for us is to provide an offer. We have not provided the offer yet. What we did do is provide our intention to make an offer, and that's why we're here today, and that's why we held a town hall, because it is our intention. I think Kelly would be, again, we haven't done this before, Kelly would be more suited to discuss the process and the timing.
Sure, I can answer that. So typically what would happen next is once a buyer delivers a letter of intent, which is just a loose outline of maybe 8 to 10 key terms that are intended to be included in the contract, at that point, we as association council would take those terms and put it into a contract that would then be negotiated on behalf of the owner. So one of the things that we encourage the board, and I know this particular board has already had 3 town hall meetings with its ownership, is we like to hear the feedback from the ownership as to what are the important issues. Is the length of the lease term a primary concern? Do owners want to make sure there's a 30-day termination clause so they can get out of a lease with the buyer if they need to? Or is the purchase price overall what everyone needs to be higher? So we take those comments that we hear from the ownership, we work with the board liaison, and put it into a contract that is as favorable as we can possibly get it. And that is what then is circulated to the ownership in a voting packet for the ownership to vote on. So at the time they sit down and vote, they have a complete set of contract terms.
if I may.
Yes.
Is it an all or nothing type of deal? Is it an all or nothing? So, for example, can individual units agree and the others not? Or does it have to be a full agreement?
So we are essentially negotiating on a bulk basis. If they achieve over 75% in the voting process, then essentially those who don't agree are required to close. However, if we are seeing a stall in the voting and owners are not voting in favor, and they're not achieving the 75%, at that point, generally our office is looking for feedback from the ownership, the board is looking for feedback from the ownership, and generally the buyer as well, as to why are owners not voting in favor. And then at that point, a contract might be amended to change some of the terms.
Okay. Trustee Kuhn, did you have any questions? Okay. I don't. Trustee Kuhn? Okay. Trustee Klein?
You both mentioned about fair market value. It's like an arbitrary number. Is there a mediator who determines if there is a discrepancy? Is there anything in place for things like this? If a buyer and a seller are arguing over fair market value?
Yeah, I can give my answer, and then Kelly, if you want to correct me if I mess up. But effectively, the fair market value, we did agree to provide, or the association will provide an appraisal. So they're going to get an appraisal on the individual units, and that will provide a fair market value of the individual units. Now,
Your appraisal, you're saying, you're gonna get the appraisal?
Not me. It's going to be hired by the association,
Oh,
and so
okay.
I'm not part of the process. That being said, the association appraisal will provide the fair market value. To the extent an owner has an objection to their fair market value, and let's just say hypothetically 75% of people approve, and there is an individual owner who maybe renovated their unit, and maybe their unit is now worth more because they renovated it, and then they will have the ability to provide an objection to their fair market value, and then they will hire an appraiser, we will hire an appraiser, and then to the extent there's a significant differential between those two appraisal numbers, then I believe the way it happens is those two appraisers then choose a third appraiser, and then two of the three have to then agree. And so that's the process that is set forth for anyone who objects with their fair market value.
Okay, now, let's say hypothetically you get to the 75%. And as you stated, you can understand why someone does not want to give up their home.
Right.
What happens to the holdouts? Do they still get market value?
Yeah, they still get market value.
And they get the same procedures as you just described?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Trustee Johnson?
I think this is for Ms. Elmore. You had mentioned that there's kind of a path within the governing documents that associations can increase the approval rate for deconversions. But am I correct that if Trilogy already owns 62% of the units, that path is closed? Is that path still feasible in any way?
You are correct. The percentage is 75% under their governing documents to amend the governing documents.
Okay. And so we've had some requests to consider raising the approval rate to 85% at the village level, similar to what Chicago did in 2019, to make it more likely that some of the Maple homeowners who did not wish to sell would not be forced to sell. From the homeowner standpoint, are there any downsides to increasing the approval rate for deconversions?
Well, this question was asked during the town hall, and I'll answer that by explaining the situation that we saw in the city of Chicago after that ordinance was passed. So there was a buyer who owned approximately 50% or so of units in a condominium association. The buyer circulated an offer, and the owners, having the remaining requisite percentage, voted to reject it. The buyer said, okay, and over the course of the next year, the buyer continued to slowly buy units, and eventually, the buyer reached the 85% or close to, and circulated a new offer. The only issue was the second offer a year later was about $100,000 less per unit. So my concern, given the percentage owned by the current bulk owner, is that I don't want the current owners to be in that situation. That it's if units are continued to be purchased, that they essentially lose some leverage that they maybe have right now, and to get a good offer and to get a good value for their property.
Okay, thank you.
Do any members of the board have any additional questions?
one more.
Trustee Klein.
Yeah, you talked about lease back. Do we have any rates that we're talking about now, square footage?
We are in the process right now. That's part of what we're trying to figure out, because within our offer, we're also going to show for each unit what their lease rate is going to be. There's a very large number of floor plans, so it's not, we can't just say, okay, there's a stack and everybody gets the same rent. There's also some floors have different balconies, some floors have walkouts, some floors have views of the preserve, some have views of the highway. So we're working on quantifying that from a rental perspective, and that will be included in our offer. I will say that it's going to be a market rate. There will be preferential treatment. We will give them a couple months of free, but it will be a market rate. So if the market is $2 a foot, so $2,000 for a 1,000 square foot unit, then that's what it will be priced. It will be in conjunction with a market rate. We will not go over market. Will not go below market. It will be a market rate.
Just out of curiosity, if your rental is parking additional? Parking,
Is parking addition?
additional.
Currently within the building, parking is an additional charge. That's correct.
Okay, and it'll stay that way if it goes to rental.
That's right. And we would be buying the
You're buying
parking
the
spaces are
spots.
deeded. We'd be, right, exactly. So we would be paying for the spots, and then they would take the cash, and then they would in turn lease back the spot.
Okay, thanks.
Can you give us a sense of like kind of average rental rates in the Optima Maple Tower currently?
What I can do is give you an approximate average rent for the units that we own. And so that's approximately between $2,400 and $2,600 on average. I'm giving that range because it's not off the top of my head, but I think a fair rough number is roughly $2,500.
The rates have been 2.6 to 3.2 per square for the rentals now.
Okay. Rabbi, did you wish to speak?
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to address you again, as I did the last time. I'd like to respond to some of the points that were made. I do appreciate words of empathy. This is the first time that we have heard that from anyone connected to that building. I am one of those people in category 3, the unhappy people, but I can tell you that
Rabbi,
I'm not.
would you lower the microphone a little bit? So.
Okay, I'm one of the unhappy people.
Hold on just a minute. Can everybody hear okay? Okay. think, I'm sorry.
And I speak really only for myself, and Eric is going to speak in a moment. But I can tell you that the group that is unhappy, these are folks that moved into the Optima building when it was first available. These are the folks who took their life savings. They sold their small homes in Skokie and Morton Grove, Niles, for their retirement. This was going to be the final station, basically. We've got people who are ill. We've got people who have major disabilities. And these are the people I speak for. Now, to immediately answer the question about that we have an option to change the bylaws or the declaration itself, that's total nonsense. The days are over. Everything is out. Trilogy already has more than enough to block any attempt at this point by any one of us or as a group of us to amend. So that's not going to happen. On the issue of this law firm, KSN, that Ms. Elmore represents, was selected by the board of the association. But what she didn't tell you is that this board is made up of 3 individuals. 2 of the 3 who control the board are Trilogy employees. So this is not a fair makeup of a board. Any decision of 2 is enough to carry the day. There's no transparency. I understand that Ms. Elmore was presented to you as an expert, but she's not the only expert in this area, and I certainly don't claim to be an expert, not in this area of the law. And I have consulted with other experts in this field, and they disagree with her legal analysis. For one, we have demanded, and we received a very cold response just the other day when I asked for an initial meeting to authorize or withhold the authority of the board to explore the potential sale. It's called the Section 18 under the Illinois Condominium Property Act. Ms. Elmore says it doesn't apply to this situation. I've consulted with at least 2 or 3 more experts, and they agree with my position that it does. Secondly, on the question of transparency, I've made a demand for a number of records pertaining to this potential buyout or the hostile takeover. To date, we haven't received. And I have to say that the response that we're getting from this law firm is pretty cold. We're being treated, I believe, as adversaries. This firm doesn't really represent us. It represents what amounts to is a very conflicted situation. If she's hired and her firm is hired by 2 people of 3 who want to take over our building, well, I guess she owes obligation to them. There's a conflict of interest here. How can she represent both the buyer and the seller? It's contrary to Illinois law of professional responsibility. Trilogy is both a majority owner right now and a prospective buyer of the entire building. Clearly, this is, to any layperson, a conflict. But from a legal analysis, it's clearly a conflict. But this is not all they do. In another situation, consulting with an expert, not only do they represent the interest of the association, as she claims, but they also, through their contract, force their attorneys to accept them for the closings, and that's where they make their money. And on top of that, they manage a company that issues title insurance. Again, it's another way of making money. There's a lot of conflicts of interest here. Now, the only reason I bring this out to you on this particular evening is to suggest to you that perhaps there is no transparency and a potential for abuse. And I can tell you, and all of you are open to inspect the record of what transpires in Chicago and why the city council enacted as an ordinance that made it very difficult for such hostile takeover. We don't want to be treated as adversaries. At a recent meeting on August 30, quote, an informational meeting, and I quote from the minutes of that, she agreed that Trilogy can continue to buy other units, and if they reach 75% before making an offer that leaves the rest of us in a precarious position, she concludes by saying, it is best to begin negotiating with Trilogy sooner rather than later. Now, how is it possible to give such advice when it compromises the interest of the homeowners? Now, when I spoke to you the last time, a couple weeks ago, my concern wasn't just for myself. Yes, I am concerned for myself, my wife, my friends in the building. But I'm concerned for the village of Skokie, and that's the bigger picture. And that's why I asked for a moratorium, not just Optima. I'm asking you to have a moratorium to stop the deconversion process that will begin here in Skokie if you allow this to happen with Optima. And that's what happened in Chicago. So the real question is, what kind of a community do you want Skokie to remain or to be? Will Skokie be affordable to most individuals once deconversions occur, take over throughout the village? And there are many buildings. I don't know if you're aware of that, how many condominium buildings. We have a lot of them here. If Maple goes, it will be open season and open the floodgates to many other buildings. And this is just what happened in Chicago. Once you take over one, then the next, and so on. Just drive down Sheridan Road, south of Loyola University, and you'll see all those buildings all taken over by sharks. Now, deconversions will generate higher rental costs here for many in Skokie who already cannot afford housing in this village. This would make it even a worse situation. Now, I don't have to remind you that Skokie has a rich history to welcome people from all socioeconomic sectors of our society. We have diversity that we're proud of, racial, ethnic, language, cultural, religious, just to name a few. I was told that we have, tonight I heard at the commission meeting that I serve on the Human Relations, 82 languages being spoken in this village. Immigrants and refugees have always been welcome to this community. My own experience as a volunteer, working as a volunteer with HIAS Chicago, a refugee resettlement agency that is based here in Skokie, that basically Skokie is no longer open to receive immigrants and refugees. Why? Unaffordability and unwillingness of landlords and agencies to rent. I received a letter this evening on my inquiry from Ms. Jessica Schaefer, who is the executive of Hyas. And she said, "We haven't had much luck in connecting to landlords willing to rent to refugees because of their lack of credit history and employment, even though we commit to paying rent for at least 4 months and then month until they are employed. To date, we only have had one household out of 29 that they resettled in the last month. 1 out of 29 in Skokie. The rest went into East Rogers Park or Uptown in Chicago." So this is the real story that they don't want to talk about. It's not just this one building. It's the nature of the community itself. And that's why we asked before, and Eric is going to add to it, we want you to impose a moratorium immediately. And take your time to study the impact of deconversions on the nature of this village. What will this look like? And secondly, we ask you to control this by creating an ordinance that at least for 85% approval rate. Thank you very much. Eric?
Trustee Sucker.
Rabbi, I have a question for you. The lawyer, Ms. Elmore, said that going to the 85%, could potentially hurt the Optima owners, and I wanted to get your response to that. That the
can't-
prices could not be as good in a year, or however she put it, a year later, if they do get the 85, and I wanted to know what you think about that.
It's for the protection of the homeowners, and I cannot speculate about future costs. I just don't have a response for that.
We don't know what we're facing. The information's not in front of us. We don't know what's actually going to happen. Yes, there are stories where, yep, you should have taken the first offer because now you just lost $100,000. You guys were receptive to me last week. I appreciate it. Eric Inbody, I-N-B-O-D-Y. I told you last week, 2 weeks ago, time was of the essence, and I thank you. You all got communicating with us, and I appreciate everything. No time has passed for me. I've had a couple deaths in the family, so I'm starting about tomorrow, and all the things I said I was going to do, I'll get rolling on. I'd like to send you a few documents that you can look at. I see you're swamped. Thank you for seeing us. I see you got a 140-page agenda tonight. I'd like to send you some documents. Rabbi Rubner is our contact. One of you will receive, and you can read them. And we need to cover a bunch of items, but you'll learn about what happens in these deconversions. You'll learn that Chicago is leading the country, and we've got our own set of problems. Yeah, we do have a board. With a little bit of key work, you'll see we've got a board that is part of Trilogy. It's no longer representing us. And, that's going to present a real issue. And maybe it is all over. I told you last month, I'm outraged. I'm feeling helpless. I don't know what to do. My plan was to retire. My home was my a cornerstone of my retirement. And if I have to return to the workforce to start paying these investors off, I'm going to continue to be beyond outraged. I thought that I'm going to have my rent raised and lose whatever equity. I think, and then when we have the next business cycle change again, Trilogy, it's easier to turn apartments into condos. It's very hard to turn condos into apartments. That's why we're here. But maybe 5 years from now, I'll be able to buy back into my place, and I'll quickly ask the investors at Trilogy to give me my $100,000 back and say, here's my down payment. Enough complaining on my part. As Ralph just said, and I'll mention, it's nice to have a retired law professor behind us, because the rest of us just don't have the ability to think through all this stuff so quickly. I would agree. We need to think about the more helpless people in the condominium that are going to lose here. We're another bell-shaped curve community like anywhere else, and there are people. There are studies that I'm going to forward in these emails I'm talking about. Minorities, people on fixed incomes, people that are retired, people with disabilities, physical disabilities, mental and/or cognitive disabilities. I know some that are all three. Some have spoken to me and said, no, I'm really scared to vote no. And I said, no, it's illegal for them to retaliate against you. It's out there. And they gave me a look. And probably they're right. I'm a naive, privileged, white American male. I've got 5 things going against me. And they're looking like, no, we're going to get in trouble here. But my point is, I'll send you some, it's a demographic that's vulnerable here. They're not able to defend themselves. Quickly online, you look at gentrification. There's always victims in gentrification, and there's winners. And in this case, as always, the divide goes bad in both. It goes bad for the victims, and the investors benefit. And I'm going to send those to you. Take a look. I know some of you already done your own homework online. You learn a lot of stuff real quickly, and I know you did last week. And most importantly, I just wanted to thank you for talking to us. You got on it the next morning, and you'll see more stuff come through from us. But I wanted you to be aware of this. Trilogy, very politely, thank you for being so polite about this. And the letter that you sent to the board, you were thoughtful. Both when you met with us and in your letter, you called us broken, and I'd say we're not broken. We might be close to fractured, but it's fixable. Broken is an old decrepit building with an irresponsible board that let things go really bad for a long, long time. And I didn't buy in the city because the assessments would be so bad, and special assessments would be bad. But we've done a great job of running the organization. There's 3 other associations, the 2 towers that we're attached to, and the larger community of the amenities, the building, the land. Everyone's doing fine. We'll get through this soon. But I appreciate all that you've done. And like I said, look out for those. You'll close both of those documents real quick and start shaking your head, and you'll realize we need to look after these vulnerable populations.
Okay. Send us the information. Trustee Kuhn?
Yes, I'd like to ask Mr. Karasik the accuracy of the information that was shared that 2 of the 3 board members are either employees or somehow related to Trilogy.
That is accurate. When the 171 units within the tower were acquired, those 2 board seats, because the majority of the building was being acquired, those 2 board seats were part of the process. So that they are accurate.
What is the board's pleasure?
I want to hear from the other lawyer, so we get the other side of the coin.
Sure. Thank you. Ms. Elmore, did you have any comment?
I think I would only add that, I can certainly appreciate the emotion, and we see this in a lot of associations. I don't know that I can speak to what the gentleman said about getting a cold response from us. We have not had any communication with any owners directly. There have been some questions about what Illinois law requires as far as what the board is required to do and whether or not to take a vote of the ownership before even embarking down this path. Fortunately, my opinion is irrelevant, as is the opinion of any other attorney, because the Illinois Appellate Court has already ruled on this issue. So I think the answer has been frustrating to a few owners, but Illinois law has already been determined. So with respect to the board makeup, and I think much was made about whether or not a board could function transparently or without conflict of interest. That is why I noted in the initial presentation, because there are 2 Trilogy board members, it was decided that the 3rd board member, who is not an affiliate or agent or in any way related to Trilogy, is acting as the liaison with the ownership on this issue and with our office. So when there are discussions with the board right now with our office as to what occurs or negotiation on contract terms, those are done with the disinterested board member. So there has not been a proposal made or another mechanism that I'm aware of to change the board composition with respect to this, but Trilogy has been, in my opinion, very cooperative with the remaining board member to step aside to allow the disinterested board member to essentially run this process in the sake of transparency with the ownership.
Thank you. Trustee Sutker.
I would like to make a motion that we raise using home rule to 85%. Also taking into account size of buildings if we could, if Corporation Council could draft something appropriate to that. It sounds like the people coming before us today are willing to take the risk of what that means for them. And so I'm gonna put that motion on the floor.
I would second this motion.
Okay, and this would come to the board at the next meeting. And then we can discuss it further. Ms. Elmore, Mr. Krasik, you understand this would come to the board at our next meeting for deliberation? Okay. Is there a consensus? Okay, formally then, please call the roll.
Trustee Sutker,
Aye.
Trustee Robinson,
100%.
Trustee Kuhn,
Aye.
Trustee Johnson,
Aye.
Trustee Klein, Mayor Van Dusen.
Aye, the motion passes.
We want to thank all of you, and especially to Ms. Sutker for the motion, and we'll be back next week or next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item B is regarding a renewal of the cable franchise agreement with Comcast. The village entered into a cable franchise agreement with TCI, which is now Comcast, on January 25th of 1999. Village staff and the village's telecommunications consulting attorney have been renegotiating a cable franchise renewal with Comcast representatives, and an agreement has been reached. A majority of what was used in the 1999 agreement has been used to be negotiated in franchise agreements has been mandated by state and federal regulations, leaving the village very little to negotiate over. The renewal agreement incorporates these regulation changes while providing for maximum protection of the village. The village right-of-way and Skokie residents who choose to be Comcast customers. Staff recommends that the village board approve a 10-year renewal franchise agreement. Mayor and board approval of the attached resolution is respectfully requested.
A motion regarding renewal of the cable franchise agreement with Comcast is in order. Trustee Johnson, seconded by Trustee Robinson. Are there any comments or questions? I wasn't sure. Oh, okay. Call the roll, please.
Trustee Sutker,
Aye.
Trustee Robinson,
Aye.
Trustee Kuhn,
Aye.
Trustee Johnson,
Aye.
Trustee Klein, Mayor Van Dusen.
Aye, the motion passes.
Items C and D were approved as part of tonight's consent agenda, and that completes my report this evening.
Thank you. Next item is report of our Corporation Council. Michael Lord.
Thank you, Mayor, trustees. Good evening, everyone. Items A and B on my report for tonight were adopted as part of the consent agenda at the beginning of this evening's meeting, and that would complete my report for this evening.
Thank you. The next item are 3 items under our Plan Commission. Our Chairman, Paul Luke, Johanna Nyden, is Joanna? There she is. And Peter Pyre.
Good
Mr.
evening,
Chairman.
Mayor and members of the board. The petitioner, who is Linder Tui LLC, wishes to make a 10-minute presentation before the board, before my report.
Okay. Steve Elrod, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. We have a PowerPoint and we have handouts, if I may.
Okay.
PowerPoint is exactly what you are receiving a hard copy of, so the audience sees everything. Mayor, good evening. Trustees, my name is Stephen Elrod. I am here on behalf of the petitioner, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to make a brief presentation. We have a first-class development team here, Scott Gidwitz, and I see Ron Gidwitz on behalf of the Gidwitz family, representing the ownership of the property, Mike Breclaw from Fitzgerald Associates Architect, and we have our traffic engineer if you have questions. Braden Lorf from my office is here. This 6.2 acre site has been owned by the Gidwitz family for decades. It's located at the corner of Toohey and Linder. Scott, on behalf of his family, has been working with and in close collaboration with your village staff for 3.5 years to create the best and most appropriate use for this site. And tonight we're proud to present our sustainable mixed-use development, which has first floor commercial uses, residential apartment uses above, fully compliant with the village's newly amended B4 regional mixed-use district. Quick overview of where the site is located. It's at the northeast corner of Toohey and Linder. It's directly across the street from the Village Crossing Shopping Center, and it's currently in the B3 and M1 zoning districts. Scott Gidwitz will provide you with a greater detail on the background of the site, and Mike Breclaw will walk you through the proposed site plan and elevations. But before they do, just a few comments. First, what a pleasure it has been to work with your professional staff and commissions through this process. We know that it was a transitional time within your community development department. We worked with many different members of your community development department, but to your staff's credit, the transitions there were seamless, and we appreciated the 3.5 years of work with that department. We were more than pleased to receive a unanimous recommendation for our plan from both your Plan Commission and your Appearance Commission. And we carefully read your staff report and the 63 conditions for site plan approval and 8 conditions for subdivision approval, and we will accept and acquiesce to each and every one. In particular, as you will see in Mike Breclaw's presentation, we made great effort to make sure that this is a highly sustainable, from an environmental perspective, development project of which Skokie can and I think will be very proud, including a bird-friendly design. And at your staff's recommendation, we have met with the superintendent of School District 72, and we've redesigned our plan to address the concerns regarding a bus drop-off. In short, we've been a very cooperative applicant, and we are asking for no monetary or financial incentive from the village. We are simply looking to be part of your new B4 district. Now, we understand that over the weekend, concerns were raised about affordable housing. When Scott and Mike complete their respective presentations, I would welcome the opportunity, Mayor, if it's okay with you, to come back up here and share some thoughts on that subject. And so I now turn it to Scott Gidwitz, and we'll go to the next slide.
Thanks, Steve. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, trustees, and village staff. My name is Scott Gidwitz, and I'm the developer of this project. My family, as Steve mentioned, has owned this property in Skokie for nearly 60 years. It is currently improved with 3 single-story buildings that are decades old and functionally obsolete. Over 3 years ago, I began exploring the redevelopment of the site. In concert with your phenomenal staff, my design team, and retail brokers, we garnered strong interest from a variety of retail tenants, but were unable to meet the needs of both the village and those prospective tenants. However, about 18 months ago, we started discussing the possibility of being included in the, or incorporated into the B4 shopping district, given that there are already being changes being considered. And what you see tonight is the product of close collaboration with your staff over the past 18 months, and that we have a a mixed-use development that complies with the B4 Development District standards. It's going to be comprised over 2 phases with 494 residential rental units. And that also includes 30,000 square feet of retail space, largely around TUI. And we're also including 5,000 square feet for a potential cannabis dispensary along Linder. We have a large public outdoor space between the 2 buildings. We've made many right-of-way improvements along both Linder and TUI, and that includes the ability to safely accommodate a school bus to ingress and egress the property per the request of School District 72. Furthermore, we are striving to be, as Steve mentioned, the most environmentally sustainable project in Skokie and hopefully the North Shore, which our designer will discuss later in the presentation. Lastly, we propose to finance the construction from private sources only, and we are seeking 0 public dollars and no TIF dollars. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Hello, my name is Mike Brecklaw. I'm with Fitzgerald Architects. We're an architectural firm in Chicago. Just briefly to describe the building and some of its components, as Scott said, it's 2 buildings, close to identical in scale and size. Existing property divisions suggested that. We enter the property primarily off the signalized intersection that comes off the mall, so we spent a great deal of time looking at vehicular circulation around the site, both to make it friendly for the residents and accommodating to the public around the building as well. The buildings, each of them have about 250 units, parking at about 1.5 spaces per unit within the building, as well as parking to support the retail facing TUI. So there's primarily about, particularly on the eastern side, there's parking at the surface in front of the buildings, and then there's a great deal of parking within the ground floor of the space. Scott mentioned a couple things we wanted to point out about the design that we've spent a great deal of time on. One is sustainable design, and that's a big word, and it means a lot of things, but we've spent previous projects our firm has done with Scott. We did one of the first, what's called the Fitwell building, which Fitwell is one aspect of sustainability, which is very much about the occupants, and it's keeping a healthy environment for those who live there, encouraging activity across the site, across the community, things like more bike room space than typically standard. We're also going for what's called Green Globes certification, which is a nationally recognized standard, and that involves things improving energy efficiency from well above code standards, improving water use or reducing water use, future-proofing the building, as we like to say, so that it's can become all electric in the future if that becomes a amenable way. So we pre-plan the building in ways that things can be incorporated into it. And generally just making it a very sustainable in the terms of material use, both for the residents and during construction and everything else that has to go with that. So that's a brief thing. This is the ground floor plan, site plan. It's in your package, but just pointing out that there's the great deal of retail faces TUI to align with the retail in the context. Parking behind that, residential entrances both on the west side and off this central courtyard between the buildings. And that's briefly it. Sorry, and just wanted to, we spent a great deal of time talking to the village about the draft ordinances out for bird-friendly design. And that's something, as an architectural firm, we've paid a great deal of attention to. But the primary thing on a building like this that we do is reduce the amount of glass. And I just took a small snapshot that you'll perhaps see in your package that outlines the amount of glass within the footprint of the building, particularly the residential floors above the retail and parking. And that's close to about 30%. 30% is actually the outlined minimum for when the threshold comes apparent. This will probably be slightly above that, but reducing the amount of glass, it's not a big monolithic area of glass, having multiple colors of things, of materials that are brick or siding on the project, things like balcony railings as opposed to being a glass balcony railing, making sure that that's a different material, again, that inhibits and keeps the birds safe. We'll also look closely at things like landscape and so forth, both to kind of inhibit birds from striking the building and reduce habitat, so that we're not encouraging birds to sort of come there. So looking at all aspects of the planning and the design.
Perfect, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to make that brief presentation. We threw in the bird strike slide because we've watched your meetings. We know that this is important to the village, and in talking with your staff, we picked up things that were important to the village. We really do believe that this is a terrific and much-needed project for Skokie. It's a significant improvement over what is there now. It's a state-of-the-art development, and it brings a fresh housing stock into an area of Skokie that will thrive as a result of it. It's directly across from a major shopping center. And that's exactly what's envisioned in your new B4 district. While we definitely do appreciate the good intent by those calling for affordable housing as part of this proposal, I do offer a couple of thoughts. I do want to remind you that we have played by your rules throughout this entire process. You know that affordable housing is not part of your zoning requirements, perhaps because you didn't have to make it a condition as other towns have had to. Skokie really has been, and I know this from representing a number of towns in the area, has been a leader on this front. According to the 2022 community data snapshot that's published by CMAP, Skokie already has a higher rate of affordable housing than the overall county and metropolitan region for households earning $50,000 a year or less. And according to IDA's recent report, Skokie's really a leader already on the North Shore in terms of housing affordability. It has a higher rate of affordable housing than most other towns, including Evanston, Arlington Heights, and Highland Park, all three of which are known as important forces in this, on this issue. I will tell you that if you did have an affordable housing requirement in place when we started our journey, this particular development would not have been proposed. Not because we or my client don't believe in this concept, it's just that the economics for this development would not work with that requirement. It really truly is as simple as that. We appreciate the conversation about affordable housing, and it may well be that you all will have a conversation about affordable housing on a higher village-wide level, and we're happy to have that conversation with you in a different forum. But we ask you not, after 3.5 years of working together with the village on what will be an outstanding development and bring great new housing stock to the village, we ask you not to have that conversation with us now. Thank you.
There are 3 votes, but before we start doing any votes, are there any overall comments or questions? Trustee Robinson.
Thank you for the presentation. You mentioned some of the sustainability efforts earlier, and you said it was going to be future-proofed. Can you explain a little bit more about the future-proofing?
Couple notes on sustainability that we had here. Future-proofing would mean things like, currently, gas and electric are combined as some of the energy sources we use kind of on buildings. We see in the crystal ball, we see that, the nation and communities are going to try to go away from carbon-based fuels. So in the event that that becomes regulated and mandated, we don't want to build a building that would be impossible for the current owner, the future owner, to adapt that in an easy way. So things like transformers, things like locations for that, locations for in the walls of a building that there can be shaft space for future conduit. that might go to solar panels on the roof or just distribute more electricity to the building. The similar is true for charging stations for vehicles, whether they be cars or scooters. Greater electrical demand in the building. That's probably the biggest item that we really want to future-proof a building for.
Okay, is there anybody who wishes to address the board? Yes.
Is this part of the general public comments or specifically addressed to the?
Well, this project, because that's what we'll be voting on.
Okay, so first of all, I do want to commend you for your sustainable practices in construction and trying to minimize bird strikes. And having lots of bike parking and putting in charging stations, and that's great and definitely forward-looking. But as far as, have you considered putting on a green roof? I mean, we're about to pass hopefully pass a sustainability plan that involves certain things, including encouraging green roofs and green walls, having a fully electric building from the start instead of having gas at all as an option, and then what we do in terms of landscaping. So would you board be willing to either ask them to just wait until you at least hear the plan read to you in the next 2 weeks, or would you be willing to consider adding some of those things?
So just as part of the overall design, you can see that the buildings are fundamentally donuts, so there's a good deal of green roof space in the middle of that that's occupied green roof. We're not planning on green roof on the very top roofs. We're, as we said, future-proofing, anticipating that there might be an opportunity for active solar on those roofs, but that's not part of it right now. I think in terms of all electric or a blend of electric and gas, that's a economic thing right now, and whether it's kind of people can afford that in their cost of housing is an open thing. That's why we're thinking of future-proofing in that sense.
In that case, would you consider putting an ultra-white roof on so that you're not taking up the roof space with a green roof, but at least it's like 98% reflective?
In following the Green Globe's guidelines for things, there's a number of things that we do to improve energy efficiency of the building, and the low albedo roof, the sort of high reflective roof, is a basic best practices that we pursue in that part of the building.
Paul?
Well, not to belabor the presentation and, go over a lot of things that already been discussed, I just want to bring up a concern by one of the neighbors about the zoning. At our meeting, representatives of a neighboring industrial property to the north objected to the request of zoning. They are a fifth-generation co-owners of Central Street Metal Fabricators at 7251 Linder Avenue, just north of the subject site. The business was established by their great-grandfather in 1912, and they've been at this location since 1959, when they were the only building on Linder Avenue. Besides Goodwill and Panera, Linder Avenue is made up of warehousing, manufacturing, and wholesale businesses. It was their opinion that residential uses do not belong among them. The use of steel trucks, beeping forklifts, dragging metal hoppers, and vibrations of punching metal machines are typically what residents will see and experience. They're just concerned at the concern for residential complaints that could be generated by their normal use of their facility. And in contrast to that, in the report, the developer has listened to the to their complaints or concerns. And I guess they will be putting in sound reducing insulation in the walls and provide better windows. Other than that, I don't have much more to expand on.
Okay.
And I just want to remind you that these three cases need to be voted on separately.
Right. Okay, Ms. Schechter?
Thank you. My name is Gail Schechter. I live at 9033B Keating. And although I'm speaking here as a Skokie resident, I'm also a member of the State Housing Appeals Board, which enforces the Affordable Housing Planning and Appeal Act, which is the law that Mr. Elrod alluded to. And while Skokie does have over the 10% threshold, it is still, it's under 20%, maybe just barely, but it's at this point it's on the at-risk list in the state of Illinois, meaning that Skokie is, that highly recommended to move into the direction of complying with the act and possibly partnering with other communities. And we'll see what happens when the next list comes out in about a year. Just have a very short statement to make here, just that Toohey Avenue is a major regional commercial corridor, and in Skokie, its businesses employ thousands of people. For this reason alone, the village should require that the developer of this development include housing that would accommodate the broad range of worker salaries in the area. As you heard, the developer's proposing 494 units, a 15% inclusionary housing set-aside, which is the generally accepted portion in most mixed-income rental ordinances, or housing ordinances, would be 74 units. This would open up new housing opportunities to live near their work. My question to you is, why not make this new development a mixed-income development? Skokie's housing stock that is affordable to low and moderate income individuals and families is diminishing, and the shortage is even worse if these households also include people with disabilities, since Skokie's limited existing affordable housing is in walk-ups. Moreover, the vast majority, 2/3 of the units in this building will be quite small, studios and one-bedroom units. I've been alarmed to see that Skokie is targeting or approving developments for households with families without, that would accommodate families without children. And the spirit as well as the letter of the Fair Housing Act is that municipalities, quote, affirmatively further fair housing. That means that Skokie should be both removing obstacles and creating new opportunities for members of all protected classes to live here, and that includes children. It's time for Skokie, I think, to create one unified housing study and plan that looks at the entire housing market. Instead, Skokie has multiple plans: the consolidated plan required by HUD for low-income people, the Concord marketing study for the luxury market, and then you have the comprehensive plan. But a unified plan would ensure that no population suffers from unintended or disparate impact of piecemeal decisions. It would include inclusionary zoning so that all new development in multifamily housing, which would happen anyway, will capture some units for people who simply earn less than the market. That's what inclusionary zoning is. It's capturing units that would be created anyway. And so that would allow some of the people you heard about earlier, people on fixed incomes, people in valued professions who simply don't earn much, young people burdened by student loans. It would also prioritize making sure that Skokie is stable, diverse, and livable for all. Thank you very much for considering this.
Paul?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Good evening. My name is Sue Lolbach. I work at Connections for the Homeless. We're a homeless services agency that serves about 41 municipalities in North Suburban Cook County, including many people from Skokie. Our mission is to serve and catalyze the community to end homelessness one person at a time. And we cannot fulfill that mission if there isn't more affordable housing in the community. So I'm here to speak about the new development. The State of Illinois Affordable Housing Planning and Appeals Act requires that municipalities maintain at least 10% of their housing affordable for people at low and moderate incomes. Skokie does meet the requirements of this, which many other municipalities in the region do not. However, as with all the municipalities in our region, the number of people needing affordable housing greatly exceeds the supply. In Skokie, 35% of resident households are experiencing housing cost burden. That means that they're paying more than 30% of their incomes on housing, and a large percentage of those are lower income, which means they cannot afford that and are unable to meet their basic needs. This is with that close to 20% of affordable housing in place. With that 20% in place, you still have 35% of your households that are struggling with housing. So most renters are struggling most renters are struggling. More renters are struggling with housing than homeowners. The most recent census data shows that the village of Skokie has about 5,700 renting households, and of those, 54% are housing cost burdened. Okay. Additionally, lower income households are struggling more than higher income households. Gail mentioned some of the people who are struggling as people with low wages, people with disabilities, but also divorced mothers, senior citizens, young people returning from college, and many other people we would all recognize as members of our families. Sorry. I can share more details on these numbers with anyone who's interested. Connections and Joining Forces does not expect the problem to decrease anytime soon. The world has changed. Between the first quarter of 2021 and the first quarter of 2022, median rents for two-bedroom apartments in metropolitan counties increased by 15%, or $179. This increase is more than 4.5 times greater than the increases of the previous 4 years. The pandemic had a catastrophic impact on lower income people who are struggling with rent. And for every $100 increase in average rents, homelessness increases by 9%. Because of this, it's imperative that all municipalities in our region look beyond the current minimums set by old statutes in the state of Illinois and really use foresight to address the growing housing crisis. All new developments should include affordable units, and a significant number of them. With a minimum of 25% of Skokie's population struggling with housing, this is really the very least that Skokie should do to meet the needs of its residents. Thank you.
My name is Ted Smuckler. I'm a resident at 8500 Lawndale Avenue. And I understand that there's no ordinance in Skokie that says that developers must have a set aside number of affordable units. Mr. Lorsch, you invited me to a conversation about 3 years ago, if I remember, about affordable housing. And if I remember right, correct me if I'm wrong, but you said you were developing an ordinance based on the Highland Park model, and it would be introduced within about 3 months.
What I said was that we have been, the village manager and I and others had been speaking to Highland Park to understand their board approach to using fair housing, sources of fair housing dollars to help the fair housing circumstances. And that investigation and that research did not ultimately lead to an ordinance in front of this board. So we did have that discussion, and it was looking to see what Highland Park had done and how they had done it.
Creating close to 500 units of luxury housing will absolutely increase rents throughout Skokie. It will absolutely make Skokie less affordable than it is now. I would plead with you to consider an affordable housing ordinance that, in Evanston and Highland Park and Arlington Heights, fairly wealthy communities, they set aside units for affordable housing. And the developers there are not saying that they could not complete projects with any affordable units. I think people who want to make money on our village should give something back. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Maggie Vandermeer. I'm also here tonight to speak about affordable housing. The rabbi earlier spoke so powerfully about why it's so important for our community and why it's so important for what makes Skokie special and unique. There is a affordable housing crisis in Skokie. In the budget message shared with residents this past spring, you celebrated the following developments: 153 luxury rentals units at High Point, 18 upscale apartments at 8110 Lincoln Avenue, 40 boutique luxury rental apartments at 8025 Skokie Boulevard, a 16-unit townhome development called Luxury on Lincoln, and an 8-unit boutique luxury condominium project on 8039 Elmwood. As of July, High Point was only 50% occupied. We don't need more luxury housing. We need affordable housing. To illustrate how bad the situation is, a Skokie resident recently shared on a Facebook parent group that their rental unit, where they live with their infant, is infested with toxic mold. They asked what recourse they had since the landlord had been completely unresponsive. They were told by community members to just keep trying with the landlord or just live with it, because Skokie has no landlord-tenant ordinance, and if they reported the landlord, they could risk losing their housing because of the lack of inventory. I know you've heard these stories in these chambers before, including tonight. Please take responsive action. We need affordable rentals so folks aren't forced to stay in unhealthy homes, and we need protections for tenants when landlords are irresponsible. We can't just keep sending people to Niles Township. I encourage you to watch the June 9th meeting of the District 219 Board of Education, where the board voted on giving another grant to the Niles Township Government and Food Pantry. Multiple board members spoke of how municipalities, including Skokie, are failing their people and expecting a public school district whose funds should be going to educate our children to fund the nonprofits that are desperately trying to keep families afloat. This is our responsibility, not the responsibility of our school districts. Thank you.
We do fund the not-for-profits to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars.
It's that issue of parity versus charity.
Well, yes.
Good evening, Mayor, and everyone on the Board of Trustees. My name is Rob Silverstein. I'm one of the owners of Central Sheet Metal Products on the north, 7251 Linder, on the north end of this project. And we really don't have a problem with this development. The developer has already said that they would do some things to prevent residential complaints. Our biggest complaint on the project is if they do, or you guys do approve to rezone this, you're gonna tank our property value, because no manufacturer is gonna wanna move in knowing that these are the conditions next to the property, that it's just gonna limit what they're able to do on a manufacturing standpoint. And somebody from the Planning Commission, excuse me, during that meeting, said that you wouldn't be looking to go any further north on Linder for any other property. So I ask that you consider people like us who've been there since the beginning and maybe grandfather us in if we were to ever sell our property into the other zoning that you're going to allow for this development. Because otherwise it's going to be next to impossible. If our doors closed and all we had left was the land, that's the last thing we have. And if we can't get anything back out of it from another manufacturer, and the next person who were to try to develop it were to have to go through this process again, it's going to be a hard-fought fight, as they've shown over the last 3.5 years. So I just ask that you think of us as a contributing member to the Village of Skokie over all these years, and we plan to be here for another 5 generations. So I just ask that you please think of us when you make this decision, and maybe grandfather us in to the zoning if we were to sell our property too. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that possible? Can you take a look at it?
We can take a look. Really, we'll have to talk to planning and see how they project that area.
Okay.
We can talk about it during the week.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Emmy Yamauchi. I'm a resident of Skokie. I wanted to return to one of the earlier conversations about the condominium deconversion. I am a condo owner. I have to say, I found this news rather shocking. But I also wanted to say to the board that even though, yes, we all get resale packages and we read them, and some of the bylaws do contain that 75% supermajority, others do not. But either way, I don't think any condo owner ever imagines that a single entity is going to gobble up that big a percentage. So when the previous gentlemen were saying, well, you read the bylaws and you signed for it. Yes, but the expectation was never that a single real estate entity was going to take over that high percentage. On the current subject, I just wanted to say 3 short things. One, I'm sure the board and you, Mr. Mayor, as well as the residents, of course, we expect this developer to comply with Skokie regulations and Illinois code and law. So I don't think it's anything to particularly brag about, because that's what should be expected. Secondly, I noticed in the requirements that apparently were being considered by the various committees that looked at the project, that there was a requirement for a PACE bus stop relocation, and there was something that said that if there is a negative impact on traffic on TUI, then a traffic consultant would be hired. So I guess my question is, maybe we could hire the traffic consultant before, because I think anyone who's driven on TUI knows that it is a mess, and the idea that there's going to be 1.5 parking spaces per unit for this 494-unit apartment complex, plus the commercial, the retail parking, just the idea of anywhere near 500 more cars entering and exiting on TUI or Niles Center, I mean, that would just really boggle the mind. And the last thing is, I don't really understand why affordable housing is such a dirty word, not to the board and the trustees, but I don't really think that should be a deal breaker. It's true, as the developer mentioned, that circumstances have changed greatly over the last 3 years, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, if our president is to be believed. And if the board decides that they want to have affordable housing as part of this deal, I would certainly support that. I don't think that just because Skokie meets certain requirements under the Fair Housing Act, that means we sit back and say, oh, great, our job's done. And I don't think it relieves any developer who expects to make a profit. It does not relieve them of their social responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, one more.
Sorry. Hi, good evening. My name is Carrie Bradan. I am a Skokie resident, and I also came to speak about affordable housing. I've been very concerned by that pattern that Maggie, you detailed so beautifully about all of the luxury developments in Skokie, and I'm not seeing housing developments for everyone else who doesn't.
Just down the street, low and moderate income, 16 units, right in the middle.
16.
16.
16 compared to the long list that Maggie laid out, and 494 more proposed tonight. It's not balanced, right? There's no balance there. I'm here because when we were looking for a home to start a family almost a decade ago, we looked around, and Skokie was where we decided we wanted to raise a family. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that we could find affordable housing here, and we couldn't find it in Evanston. And no offense to any other North Shore community, but we didn't want to move to communities that didn't have the economic diversity and all the other beautiful types of diversity that Skokie has. We wanted to raise children in an environment where they weren't thinking that the whole world is upper class. That's not where I want to live. That's not where I want my kids to live. And I think that it's really important that we listen to the stories, many of which have been shared here in public comments that I've heard, and I hear them out in the community all the time, of families being pushed out of Skokie. Their rents are raised and they can't afford to live here anymore. And they have to move to other places. Their kids have to leave the only school they've known. They have to leave family, they have to leave friends, they have to leave their roots. Is that the Skokie we want to turn into? I don't think so. I want to be the Skokie that welcomes everybody, as our signs say. And if we continue down this path where every development is all luxury, practically, minus 16 units, that's only welcoming the wealthy. That's not welcoming everybody. That's not what makes Skokie great. And so if we were 10 years younger and coming up now, we would not be able to afford it here anymore. The way that rates have risen, we wouldn't be moving here. And that makes me really sad. That makes me really sad for those who are younger, those who are in different circumstances, who aren't as fortunate as we are to be where we are, because we love this place. And we want it to continue to be a place that people can afford to live in. So please do, 10% is not anywhere near where it needs to be. The stats that you shared from where we are with 54% of renters having that housing burden, that's really important. We need more units. This isn't sustainable. So, thank you. I'm so sorry.
Okay, we have 3 votes we need to take.
Okay. I also like to add that a traffic study was made for the site plan approval.
Okay.
Can we have time for questions?
Yes.
A number of people have noted tonight that we don't have an inclusionary zoning policy. There's no kind of village requirement that any percentage of the units in a new development be kind of quote-unquote affordable. I guess my real question is why? I guess what has prevented Skokie from taking that step?
Well, the market, in our case, has worked. We have 19.7% affordable housing in the village of Skokie. And you don't disincentivize. And inclusionary zoning has been shown to disincentivize. When something is working, our staff knows that where we possibly can, we try to create low and moderate income housing. And it has worked. We are almost twice what the state of Illinois has established as the standard 10%. It's Niles, Skokie, Evanston, and then everybody else is below 10%. If everybody were to come up to where Niles, Skokie, and Evanston are, we would be able to solve the problem. There is no question that there is a low and moderate income housing problem. But you don't solve it by putting straitjackets on developers. If you do, then developers simply go elsewhere. To this point, and this, I think, is a testament to the staff that we have attracted a lot of housing. And I'm expecting that there may be even some future housing development coming to the village, which will include low and moderate income housing. But thus far, we've managed to far exceed what has been required by state law, and which has created a mixed market. One of the things that has made Skokie over the years attractive to home buyers, to renters, et cetera, has been the diversity of our market. We go from low and moderate income to very wealthy housing. And that has attracted a diversity of people to the village. I don't know that what is called inclusionary zoning would solve the problem. Many of the communities that have been cited as having inclusionary zoning do not meet the 10% threshold. There's a reason why. Developers are not going there. John, I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
We have a conversation with every residential developer when they come and have an interest in building in the community. And we talk about a number of things, the values of the community and the board, and it's just, there's so many items that we talk about. But affordable housing is one of those. And we have lots of experience now of developers that are not able to have affordable housing within their developments. Every pro forma of every development is unique. Every developer's experience with affordable housing is different. The size of the buildings, the location of the building, whether or not it's a public-private partnership with some type of public participation in the project makes a difference. And so the results are positive in that the village is increasing its affordable housing. The last two statistics that have been provided by outside entities shows that the village's percentage of affordable housing increased, I believe it was by just over 5%. And so the affordable housing in the community is recognized as being higher than our neighbors, other than Niles. And so the village has within the ecosystem of housing a number of other processes in place in order to assist either existing homeowners or housing. There's a home assistance program for individuals that want to stay in their home, but they are having financial difficulty. And so the village is able to provide funding to those individuals in order to help them stay in their home. The village has implemented a neighborhood enhancement program that is specifically designed to invest in neighborhoods where there is people within a certain income level. And so the village has a number of initiatives that it has pursued over the years and continues to pursue, and numerous conversations about the richness of a variety of housing that our community is very fortunate to have, and we continue to strive to maintain what we have and to grow what we have.
The 19.7% number that was cited, so would I be incorrect in saying that that number is on the decline?
No, we've never.
So the statistics that I have in front of me, in 2011, Skokie had 14.7% affordable housing, and in 2016, it was 19.9%. So there was a growth.
If, there was a kind of a list of new residential developments that were listed tonight, and, I've also tried to look at kind of new residential units that have been initiated or approved or finished in the past few years. It's almost entirely rentals. It's almost entirely kind of unaffordable, or at least not quote-unquote affordable. And it's majority, over 50% one-bedrooms. And it's close to 90% one and two bedrooms. So, you know, these new units that are coming in, you know, the trend is very, very clear. It's almost exclusively rentals. It's almost exclusively expensive. It's almost exclusively designed for kind of wealthy singles and couples. You know, there was kind of fair housing issues mentioned tonight. I guess, is the village concerned about, you know, the fact that so many of these new developments are not particularly inclusive of not only low and moderate income people, but also of families, of larger family units, since they're almost exclusively one bedroom and one or two bedrooms?
Almost all of them, to my knowledge offhand, do have 2 and 3 bedroom. Part of it is a balance, quite frankly. The school districts are adamantly opposed to developments that have 2, but particularly three bedrooms, because it then becomes costly to them. The project before us tonight will probably create for District 72 approximately an increase in property tax revenue of about $135,000. If the projection is accurate about how many families with children going to the district schools proves accurate. So it's simply, it's part of a balance between getting development, bringing residents to the village, and at the same time, providing that families can move in. I don't remember offhand, maybe, how many 3-bedroom units and 2-bedroom units are there in the project?
I pulled that sheet, Mayor. 138 two-bedroom and 24 3-bedroom are proposed.
And we hear from the school districts all the time about having to try and accommodate them so that they at least break even on these projects. It's not always an easy calculation to make.
Indeed, Mayor, that number was reduced after our meeting with the school district superintendent because of their concern about the number of 2 and 3 bedrooms.
Right, yeah.
Sorry, what was reduced?
We reduced it to this number from a higher number of 2 and 3 bedrooms after our meeting with the school district in order to attempt to accommodate their concern. We were trying to strike a balance.
Oh, listen.
And let me maybe add a little more to the conversation with some numbers. Maybe this will help. These are not precise numbers unless I acknowledge they're precise. But let's assume that an apartment generates $3,500 in annual property taxes. And so that property tax is allocated to all of the taxing bodies on a tax bill, approximately 12 different units, elementary school district and the high school district being the largest percentage of a property tax bill, about 75%. So if the monthly property tax bill for an apartment is about $3,500, and of course that's an average because you have a studio up through a 3-bedroom apartment. But one student to be educated in an elementary school district in our community is somewhere between $15,000 and $18,000 a year per student. And so that is some of the data that is incorporated into the conversation when a school district meets with a developer, that they understand the cost of educating a student, and if 2 and 3 bedroom apartments generate more school students, there is a preference for that to be understood by the developer.
I certainly understand District 72's concern. I think, you know, on a much broader level, you know, I think the idea of a almost 500-unit building that has virtually no school-age children kind of begs the question of whether if it is by design inclusive in its nature. And the trends that I mentioned are far beyond just District 72. They're really village-wide. And so this is really a broader trend in the new housing that we're seeing. Not particularly inclusive of low and moderate income folks, not particularly inclusive of families. So I'm not trying to pick on this development specifically. I think these trends are much bigger than this development.
Did you, Mr. Elrod, did you have any concluding remarks? And then we'll take the votes.
Mayor, we took detailed notes, and we respect the comments that were made and appreciate the comments. And I think you and the manager spoke eloquently to the comments in response. We, as a developer, did what we could to address concerns that have been raised throughout the process. We played by your rules. We exceeded your rules in many respects. And we've provided a development that will bring a diverse and new housing stock to this particular area of the village. We believe it will more than satisfy a need that this board and your plan commission identified in reviewing the B4 district to allow for mixed-use residential development to help your retail grow, to help your retail tax base. That is a very important need that we believe this development is serving. Mayor, we thank you all for your comments. We appreciate that you may have bigger issues, but we would also appreciate the board focusing on our development and allow it to stand on our own merits. Thank you.
Thank you. The first would be Plan Commission Case 2022-22P, Zoning Map Amendment 5404 to 5442 Avenue and 7235 Linder. A motion is in order. Trustee Sutker, seconded by Trustee Klein. Call the roll, please.
Trustee Sutker,
Aye.
Trustee Robinson,
Aye.
Trustee Kuhn,
Aye.
Trustee Johnson,
I vote nay.
Trustee Klein,
Aye.
Mayor Van Dusen.
Aye, the motion passes. The next one is Plan Commission Case 2022-23P, Subdivision 5404 to 5442 Avenue and 7235 Linder Avenue. A motion is in order. Trustee Klein, seconded by Trustee Sutker. Call the roll, please.
Trustee Sutker,
Aye.
Trustee Robinson,
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Just, Mr. Silverman, is this the motion that's attached to that particular case when he was requesting to be grandfathered in, whatever consideration?
That would come up separately, I think, would it not? Because that would be within the zoning.
We're not looking at that at present time, or north of there.
Okay.
It's not in front of us, but we've taken account of it, and I think with planning staff during the coming week, we can discuss it. I wouldn't link it here, but we just can't, because it's an overall zoning decision. But we hear it, and upon your request and the mayor's request, we will certainly look into it in the coming week, too. We understand it, and it's always the push-pull in zoning. I mean, you know, what is the harmonious use next to the other zoned area? And we've got plenty of people on planning staff who can help us through that.
Aye.
Trustee Kuhn,
Aye.
Trustee Johnson,
Nay.
Trustee Klein,
Aye.
Mayor Van Dusen.
Aye, the motion passes. And then finally, Plan Commission Case 2022-24P, Site Plan Approval, 5404 to 5442 and 7235 Linder Avenue. Site Plan Approval. Motion, Trustee Sutker. Trustee Klein. Call the roll, please.
Trustee Sutker,
Aye.
Trustee Robinson,
Aye.
Trustee Kuhn,
Aye.
Trustee Johnson,
Nay.
Trustee Klein,
Aye.
Mayor Van Dusen.
Aye, the motion passes.
That concludes my report for this
Thank you
evening.
very much. And the concluding item this evening is public comment. Is there anybody who wishes to address the village board? Yes, sir.
While he's coming up, we just, Trustee Robinson, we do have the connection and conversation with that neighbor, and we'll continue to follow through.
Mayor, Village Board, staff, and citizens. My name is John Yukana. My parents, my siblings, my wife, her family, and I have all been residents of the village of Skokie at least at one point of our lives, if not multiple. I attended St. Peter's Catholic School. I lived off of Keeler and Dempster. And today I represent 4043 and 4045 Main Street, a commercial property, in an attempt to sell that property. The property consists of 2 PIN numbers. In full transparency, the owners of the property are also my parents. They chose to invest in this community because they saw and loved the way that the village board and the community and members invest themselves into this community, as apparent by this meeting and the values of that the community brought up during the meeting. My parents took that property from a foreclosure when they purchased it to full occupancy by a community health pharmacy. However, that pharmacy closed in early 2020 due to COVID, and the space has been vacant since. There's been no shortage of interest in the property. However, and that includes from members of the Black, White, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Indian, Assyrian, Afghani, Mexican, old, young, men, women have all shown interest to utilize that space in some form. Until they find out that the most recent tax bill when the property was occupied was $18,000 per year per PIN. That means $36,000 from back in 2020. Surely expected to be much more as we head into 2023 with new tax assessments, tax rates, and tax needs from taxing bodies. I understand that this tax bill is not a burden set forth by the village of Skokie, but rather an amount needed for the schools, the police, the fire department, as well as village needs. And while I can say that the investment being made into the youth of this community, as discussed previously for the schools, is as amazing as a father of 2 myself, I can say that the burden it leaves our small businesses, our landlords, and so many other members of the community is extremely difficult to continue investing into this community, and in many others ways with other resources, as we are chasing dollars to simply put our dollars to work for the community. I myself used to teach music theory for free at the Assyrian National Council on Nile Center Road. I also was a radio host serving local community and have served at local events like the Skokie Festival of Cultures. And those wonderful programs are great to take time and volunteer for, but when real life hits and you gotta pay the bills, it makes it extremely difficult to take your time for that. This property in the last 2 years alone has cost our family over $50,000 in mostly in just vacancy taxes. We want to sell, we try to sell, and we also would be happy renting it, but it's been difficult to say the least. We have been working closely with village staff for potential users and buyers, and I often refer them to Leslie Murphy and Brian Augustine, both of which have been amazing for me to work with. And about 15 or 20 years, there was conversations that you would hear sometimes, like the village of Skokie is not business friendly. I would say that today the village of Skokie is open for business and ready to help all businesses. For example, the TIF program, which was presented to us as a potential incentive, and also a 7C because of the vacancy for 2 years, which has been mentioned. However, while those amazing incentives exist, it's not enough to get us to the end goal of occupying the space either through sale or lease. One potential user that has continuously shown strong interest over the couple of years that we've had that property vacant is a Latino religious group, Sala Angelica de la Sana Doctrina. I understand the village's process for plan review, but I wanted to at least bring them to introduce them. I have been reluctant to tie the property up to them, with them, I should say, in the pursuit of their needs for zoning. However, they did apply on their own accord for a preliminary plan review back in March 2022. After receiving staff comments, they did not want to invest what they estimated to be about $8,000 to $10,000 on a project, which in the plan review clearly stated staff does not recommend, understandably so, based on the village code. However, they continue to show strong interest in that property and strong interest in the community. They asked me to come to this meeting to discuss the property with the board and also to allow them to introduce themselves. We also notified about 25 businesses and 175 homes about this interest. And we understand that this would not be a final board direction or community direction if the community has comments, but we wanted to know if there was a clear no feeling not to invest $8,000 to $10,000 of that group's money and not to tie up the property for 3 to 6 months, which would also cost my family continued amounts of money. Although there is not specific buyer in mind other than them right now. On the other hand, if pursuing of such a use is welcome, the religious group is ready to invest into the community, invest into the building, and begin building their new home here. I'm not specifically biased towards the group, although I have come to gain a lot of respect for them and their individual members, and many of them have become friends of mine. But that's what happens in a community. Selfishly, I'm also here because I would like to see that property used for the community, but also for my family, because that asset has quickly become a liability for us. Today, I'm here to support them and help them introduce themselves to the community here. And we wanted to let the board know that they would not be looking for any kind of TIF funds. However, as you do know, that type of use is a exempt use. There's also 2 members from the group who would like to introduce themselves and say hello to the board, answer any questions that the board may have about them. And we are seeking to, in the coming days, understand if some type of use as such would be welcomed. Please note that continuing to pursue this use would cost the landlord time, as I discussed, because of the allowing them to get the zoning, but also cost their community a significant amount of money. And what's in the package that I provided you guys is simply a map of the general area on Main Street, the property itself, a survey of the property, a letter which we gave the 25 businesses and roughly 175 homes in the area. I did receive about 4 comments either through text or email in favor and 5 not in favor. There was no other comments that I received to date. And the original preliminary plan review, which I highlighted some interesting facts for. I'm happy to discuss those, but I don't want to take any much more of your time, as I know you've had a long night. And I'd be happy to introduce a couple of the members of that group.
Yeah, we would be more than happy to meet them and welcome you to the meeting this evening. If I may, this is brand new.
No, I understand.
Just one second. What I would suggest is that you, John, a corporation counsel, myself, we get together and meet and we talk. Perhaps you could get in touch with my assistant, Vicky Varga, in the back, and she'll be glad to coordinate and set up a meeting so we can discuss it.
Wonderful.
And John will be prepared. He'll talk to the planning staff, and we could discuss it. But we'd be happy to.
We're not expecting to take more than a minute each and
No,
just
no, no,
introduce
that's not a
themselves
problem.
and members of their community.
Sure.
I'm not sure, because we did send out the letter, if there was anybody from the community that wanted to speak to them after the meeting to address their own concerns with that use and those prospective users. I understand that this is not something that the board has any background on, and this is meant to be an initial introduction, as I put in that letter. It's not meant for us to get final direction. I understand there's a governing process and all that, but we wanted to get ahead of it so that we're not a year in or 6 months in and having problems. And also, the spending of funds for them, is a sensitive subject because they are not-for-profit.
That would be very unfair. Yes.
I understand. Thank
Yes. No, I mean, that would be very unfair to you, to the congregation, but also unfair to the village. We would expect to have a very frank conversation so that you can make your decisions.
Understandably so.
Sure.
So I'll introduce Brian.
All right, good evening, everyone. So my name is Brian. I'm a member of the congregation. So just as a preface, it is a Christian-based congregation, mostly Latinos in the congregation. Originated mostly the church from Guatemala. So mostly the members that you see here, mostly they're based from Guatemala. So it's not only Chicago that has had the church here. So there's right now 25 assemblies, you could say. So around the whole United States. And Chicago is one of them that has an assembly here as well. So just wanted to introduce myself. Also just wanted to, so we've grown. We've had mostly 52 consistent members, and then another 20 to 30 that have shown interest in congregating with us. So in the current location that we are at the corner of West Lawrence and Pulaski in Chicago. So we rent that space out. It's 2 locations that we rent out, and throughout the years it has grown to be very, the capacity has reached its maximum. So we have shown interest in the property that he has shown us. So it would be of great benefits to everyone if it keeps growing. We know how much it would keep growing in Skokie as well. So we welcome all of anyone that would congregate with us, and also just seeing it grow even more and more as the years go on. If we do get an okay to start working on the location, remodeling it, making everybody around the community feel welcomed, and also you guys welcoming us as well in the area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Litzy, and I'm a member also from this church, and thank you for all listening to us. I may be very young, but I still take part. I go with my parents and everything. And I've been in this church for about 7-8 years, so I was like 10 or around that age, and we've seen how our community is building more by the day, more children, and we would like to find a place where we can all settle in and bring more people in the community. The way I see us is a very strong community together, the brothers and sisters in Christ, and if it were to be okay for us to stay here, I feel it would be very great for us, and it could be a new experience for everybody else, since it's not very common everywhere. But also, if I were to say, anybody will be allowed to enter, okay to enter, and it would be a great space for us to grow even more, because we're growing more by the day, and yeah. And I guess it would be very nice to be here also because of the environment here. It's very safe, very quiet, and also very beneficial for the kids to be growing up in a space where there's a lot of diversity, and anybody or will be accepted as they are, no matter race or religion that they are. Any questions?
No, not at the moment, but welcome. We look forward to meeting with you and discussing your plans. Thank you very much for coming out tonight. It's been a long meeting for you to sit very patiently, so we appreciate your patience this evening. Thank you.
I just wanted the members to have a chance to raise their hands to show you their presence here.
Great. Thank you for coming tonight. You've been very, very patient. We appreciate it. So, if you would get in touch with Vicki, we'll set up the meeting. Yes, ma'am.
I am a Skokie resident, and I meet weekly with other residents to discuss shared concerns we have about the environment at large and in our community. Some of our group live in large apartment complexes that do not have recycling, and for at least 3 years, we have been working to rectify that problem. When we first reached out to the village, we learned about a great program providing free recycling toters for businesses and apartment buildings. However, this requires building management companies to opt in, and getting that to happen has been frustrating to say the least. After multiple attempts and efforts to engage our building management, as well as following up with Lakeshore Recycling Systems and the village manager to see other options available, we still do not have recycling at our apartments. In that time, there have been hundreds, if not thousands, of bags of recyclables that could have been recycled but instead went to the landfill. Over 8,000 gallons of recycling in 3 years. And that is only counting the apartment complexes our members live in. We are asking the Board of Trustees to pass an ordinance that would require apartment complexes, condominiums, and businesses to provide recycling services for their tenants. This would not even add a burden to property owners, as they would have the option to join the current free program. Alternatively, the village could simply automatically provide recycling to all buildings. This is very important to all of us who live in the community, and there's no reason why this cannot happen without delay. Thank you for your time and consideration of this important issue.
Okay, could you give us your name and a contact phone number?
My name is Zephyr Alicehouse.
Yeah, if you just give it to,
Just walk over there?
yes. Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to address the board? Trustee?
I just have some wonderings. I was curious to know, I heard one of the public comments talk about the landlord-tenant ordinance. If we can get some more information on that?
Sure.
Just for the community. And I think you started this, Mr. Lockerbie, about the longitudinal data for affordable housing. So I'm just curious to know the growth or how it is. And I think that'd be pretty good information for the community as well.
Sure.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I thought you were gonna get your answer, which is why I stepped away for a second. I brought my laser pointer. Is it okay if I just take a minute while all the background noises finishes with people? Okay. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about why composting is important. And I know I'm talking about more science before I give you the action items, but I promise at the end of this one there are action items. So as you all know, plants perform photosynthesis. They take in light from the sun, usually from the sun, and they turn it into chemical energy. And the way they do this is they take in light, they breathe in CO2, they break apart that carbon and oxygen atoms, and then they rearrange the atoms. They release 2 oxygen atoms stuck together, and they incorporate that carbon into various sugars. That plants use the sugars for energy, and other things that eat the plants use those sugars for energy, and they incorporate those sugars and they break apart those carbon-containing molecules into other parts of their tissues. Now, if it's a plant, some of those carbon-containing molecules end up in the soil, and they end up locked in the soil until you disturb it. So plants help, one main takeaway is plants help with carbon capture. After these plants die, they decay, and in the natural process that doesn't involve landfills, in the presence of oxygen, this decay releases CO2 back into the atmosphere. Now, the CO2 does not create additional warming because it was taken out of the atmosphere in the first place to make that plant material. This is the concept of borrowed carbon. So yes, you're emitting CO2, but it's not a net increase in the CO2. But if this decay happens in the absence of oxygen, what ends up happening is methane gets produced. Now, the atmospheric concentration of, the atmospheric concentration of CO2 is 416 parts per million, and the atmospheric concentration of methane is 1.7 parts per million. Now, this is 1 molecule of CO2 being produced or 1 molecule of methane being produced. And right now, that 1 molecule of methane goes drastically to increasing the percent amount of methane that's in the atmosphere over what that 1 molecule would do if it were CO2. Now, as I showed you a plot before, and I have it on the next slide, the CO2 line is saturated, so the amount of extra CO2 you're putting into the air does 1 molecule, I know I hear all the time talking about reducing our CO2 emissions, but that 1 molecule of CO2 does not have nearly as big an impact as 1 molecule of methane. And by some calculations, that molecule of methane can be 40 times more potent as 1 greenhouse gas, or 1 molecule of CO2. Now, part of the reason is because of these concentrations, and the other part of the reason is that when I was showing you that black body curve and what Earth is emitting, it emits more light at the wavelength that methane likes versus the one that carbon dioxide is able to absorb. So here, this is the methane line, and you see the emission is just higher from the heat that Earth is giving off. The emission is higher here where methane is absorbing it versus over here where carbon dioxide is absorbing it. Oh, it did work, okay. But what can we do about it? Well, that's why we should compost. So first of all, backyard composting prevents all that stuff from getting into a landfill where it will decay in the absence of oxygen and it will produce methane. Backyard composting is it's right there for you, and we're totally allowed to do that. I know we're allowed to have that in Skokie as long as you don't put like meat products and stuff that will attract rats. Now, some compost facilities, like the one that Collective Resources sends their food scraps to, have, it's called aerobic composting, where they keep turning it to keep oxygen in there so it prevents methane from being produced. And then they go and they sell those food scraps. Other facilities, including the one at Lakeshore Recycling Services, have anaerobic digesters, which compost without oxygen, so it does produce methane, but they trap the methane and they prevent it from going into the atmosphere. That's why it's so important to do something like this. This composted organic matter at Home Depot, anyway, sells for $6.27 a cubic foot. I mean, that's no market for it. And if you go to this website where you can buy finished compost, it will give you some places where you can find it. And then here are just some different companies that either produce it or they'll take it. So it's not that hard, right? People have garbage disposals, and that's basically what's going on at that water treatment plant at Howard and McCormick. They take all of the organic material, some of which is from your water, your sink, and some of it's from other places, and they compost it, and that's why it stinks the way it does. But So another thing that you can do is support municipal composting. And I mentioned before that in the next 2 weeks, you're going to hear about the sustainability plan. Part of that is trying to get funding and education for municipal composting. Curbside pickup would be great. Even if we had a place where we could go drop it off, that would be still a game changer. We should support ways for restaurants to avoid throwing out food. In Evanston, they have something called community refrigerators, and there are these 4 community refrigerators where I think they don't want people just bringing their leftovers, although there's nothing technically to stop you. But the restaurants could take food, and it's, officially produced with health inspectors and everything, and you just put it in these refrigerators in these buildings, and people who are hungry can go and take it. Keeping it out of the landfill waste stream also just makes the trash less stinky and just less gross in general. There are plenty of individual steps with the village. We need village help to educate the public, and there are a lot of the components of this sustainability plan that you're going to hear about that involve, we need an education campaign for this, and we need a pilot program to display how it works for this. Here are just a couple of things that people at home can do right away to start to reduce their methane production. Thank you. This time I didn't get cut off. Yep, that was it.
This was your best one yet.
Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Sucker.
I move we adjourn.
We are adjourned.